Let There Be Carnage has finally hit theaters, and that means it's time to stop and talk about all the spoilers. Let's do this. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Let me know, what did you think about Venom, Let There Be Carnage? As this is a spoiler review, feel free to spoil away down below in the comment section, and you don't need to include a spoiler warning. If you haven't seen the movie yet, you have been warned. If you're new to my spoiler reviews, they're intentionally a little bit more freeform, and I put chapter markers down below so you can skip ahead to whatever specific discussion you want to have. There's a specific thing you want to hear my thoughts on, they're all right down there below, and somewhere one of these ones is the post-credit scene that I know a lot of you want to know my thoughts on. With that said, let's get started. First thing I want to talk about are my impressions after a second viewing. I saw the movie back on Tuesday and posted my spoiler-free review yesterday, and that kind of had my general impressions after one viewing, and then I went to go see it Thursday night with a general audience. I love to go see these Marvel movies, these big tentpole films with an actual audience of fans opening night to just get the excitement of the room and experience that with them. In particular, I wanted to feel the room as it did that post-credit scene. And so saw it a second time and kind of want to share any changes in my impression. Impressions on the film. I'm assuming you've watched my spoiler-free review. If you haven't, I thought it was a better version of what they did with the first film, and it got to the point quicker. It doubled down on the relationship between Eddie and Venom. I thought Carnage was a better villain, and so it's a B movie. It's not trying to be high art, so I gave it a B, and I thought it was an 8 out of 10 on the entertainment scale. My general recommendation would be, if you liked the first movie, I would guess that you'd probably like this movie more. If you're more mixed on the first movie, but you dug the Eddie and Venom stuff, I would guess you'd like this movie a good bit more. And if you just didn't like the first movie and the humor and the relationship between Eddie and Venom was just cringe for you, you're probably not going to like this movie, but maybe it won't annoy you quite as much. So I've seen it a second time, and I would essentially stand by that. That was my thoughts on it. Kind of like, I had a lot of fun when I first watched it. I thought the story was a lot better paced, made more sense, and got to the point much quicker. Still feel that way. That's a general impression about it. I also talked about the fact that the pacing in the movie is really quick. Now, when you watch it a second time, you pick up on what was lost in that a little bit more. When you watch it the first time, you're just trying to pick up on the story and follow along and not miss anything, so you kind of go along really quickly. And you also don't have the big picture, and so you can miss some things as you're watching it. Watching it a second time, I thought it was significantly more obvious that they just trimmed it back so much. And I don't know if there's like 30 more minutes of this movie. It definitely felt like they cut a couple subplots, and I'll discuss that later on, but in particular with Eddie on the run, I'm guessing there was probably a subplot with that. I'm guessing there was a good bit of exposition about the exact nature of Carnage that was probably cut out. But with all that said, I felt the movie is still very coherent considering how much they just tightened this thing up. Even like at the beginning of the movie when Eddie's doing the piece on Carnage or Cletus, it's cut in a way where it feels like they went, hey, we don't need to have these as two separate scenes. Let's just intercut this on top of this. Let's just play it out at the same time. And so as Cletus is giving the information, it's like cutting away to the response to people reading the article that's going to come in the future. And I would guess some of that stuff they did in the editing room, and there was a version of this that kind of played out much longer. And Andy Serkis in interviews has said, the reason the runtime is quicker is because I just wanted to get to it. I just wanted to, as quickly as possible, tell the story that people want. Here's the quote he said, I wanted a thrill ride and not hanging around for too much exposition. Andy Serkis said that in interviews, and I think you can feel that. Like, he pinpointed not hanging around for too much exposition, and I think a lot of that stuff was left on the cutting room floor, and I'm curious if they're going to put out a pretty substantial director's cut, because it doesn't seem like there was a lot of issues behind the scenes. I think things seem to go pretty smoothly. He seems to be a good sport about all of this, in which case that's when you typically get a director's cut or an extended cut. And I think we're going to see something like that, or it wouldn't surprise me at all. Along those same lines, it's a movie that there was a lot of debate. Is this thing going to go rated R? And when you watch it, you could see how there'd very easily be a cut of this, because, I mean, it legitimately has all these moments where Carnage is, like, holding a person and goes like this, and then it cuts to someone's reaction to something horrific happening. A head being bitten off. And so, once again, could there potentially be an extended cut that adds in both some deleted subplots or significantly more explanation about a few things that were going on, as well as more heads getting bitten off? That wouldn't surprise me too much if we got that. Another thing I'll kind of elaborate on for my review, some specific things in case I didn't talk about it, if it was a little bit big in my review, previous review, but like I talked about the creative flourishes with this movie. In particular, there's this postcard scene where Eddie reads the postcard from Cletus, and then it starts moving into this animation, and then as he's reading it, it's cutting back, and eventually it's visualizing it with the two of them at the same table. And I just thought that was really nicely done. It's just like, of the two movies of the Venom franchise, like the most interesting and creatively brought together little sequence to how to visualize something. Other thing I want to talk about is the reception to the film, both audience, what I'm reading on Twitter, and then Rotten Tomatoes. So the first movie infamously got a very bad Rotten Tomatoes score, like a 30% or something like that. But audience seemed to really dig it. It made a lot of money, and a bunch of people on the internet were extremely defensive of it. So people were curious, like, how are people going to respond to the second one? Well, as of this exact moment in time, let me look up. Its Rotten Tomatoes score is at 58%. So it's dropped significantly from earlier today. Earlier today, it was like between 70 and 75%. It's dropped down to 58%. So it's dropped significantly from there. But that number is still almost double that of the first movie. Not quite fresh at the moment, but it's double what it was for the first movie. And getting on Twitter, I saw a good number of people that said it had more of the entertaining stuff from the first movie, still kind of a mess, still all over the place. Saw other people saying they just had a blast with it. As I was walking out of the theater, I heard people around me saying, one guy said he loved it. People hooting and hollering throughout parts of the film. I got on Twitter, and I also saw some people saying this is the worst way to do a sequel. It doubled down on all the terrible stuff about the first movie. There's more cringe humor. The cringe humor starts even earlier in the movie. So opinions are kind of all over the place. And even when you look at a Rotten Tomatoes score of 58%, that's basically 50-50 of critics. Half of critics recommend it because Rotten Tomatoes score is a binary. Basically, it's all the critics basically say, do you give it a thumbs up or you give it a thumbs down? That's what that percentage means. What percentage gave it a thumbs up? So over 50% of critics give it a thumbs up, but only barely over 50% did that. And that seems to be kind of how people are responding to it, that people that dig the Eddie Venom relationship dynamic, they're going positive on it. And then people that are just like, it's just too cringe. They see a movie that's cut too thin, edited too fast, paced too quickly, and so there's just not enough depth and just too much cringe. For me personally, I had a lot of fun with it, and I'm not surprised that the Rotten Tomatoes score is a lot higher. I went negative on the first movie. I did, and this is my genre. This is what I talk about. I went negative on it. I went positive on this one, and I absolutely stand by that. And I think there's a lot of people that are in the same categories as me, is that were like, there's a lot of stuff I enjoyed in that first movie, but man, it's 40 minutes till Venom shows up. And that's what it showed up for, and it was awkward, and it was like the way that it gets from A to C is by way of all these extra letters, K and Z, and we go all over the place just to get to see where Venom shows up. And this movie, he's just right there. It gets right to the point. It's very clear early on where everything's headed, how people are connected to each other. And so I just thought a much more efficient, much clearer film. And I think that's what you're seeing on the Rotten Tomatoes score. Some people are just never going to like the nature of the dynamic between the two of them. But the creative team understands, I think they understand what the people that liked the first movie liked about it. And so they give you more of that. And some people just aren't going to like that. And I liked what was in that second half, and this is a full movie of it. So I went even more, much significantly, liked this one a good bit more than the first film. not great cinema, but entertaining cinema. Next topic of discussion, Eddie and Venom. At the heart of this film is that bromance between Eddie and Venom. And as best I could read on the internet, this movie takes place 3 years after the first film, and so they've been living together in the same body for 3 years, and they're driving each other a little bit crazy. And so essentially, this movie is The Odd Couple. That you had that in the first movie, but they were just meeting, and you could see all the ways that they complemented each other and drove each other crazy. And this movie is the extension of that. And in the interviews with the director and the promo material, he overtly stated that. He overtly stated this movie is supposed to be an odd couple. It's about the 7-year itch in a relationship where you can't live with each other, you can't live without each other. And you see that very much on display. And it would make sense that with these characters, there would be a really difficult situation. One of them wants to eat people's heads, and one of them doesn't. One of them understands the investigative forces in the United States, and the other one is an alien that doesn't fully understand the consequences of eating people's heads and the investigations that ensue because of them. And there's a tension because of that. And so it plays out this familiar thing about roommates, about couples, from sitcoms, from The Odd Couple, that we've seen many times before, but in a way that we haven't seen before, a symbiote alien inside of a guy. And so it just takes the familiar and does something really fun with it. And once again, if you don't like the cringe humor in these movies, there's quite a bit here that'll drive you crazy, and you'll be cringing a lot during this movie. But if you like just this weird humor that they have, there's so many fun little details. Like, they got to find a way to feed Venom if we're not going to just eat human heads all the time, in which case they have like chickens, and they're eating chickens, and they've taken chickens as pets. And you'd think that maybe Eddie would be the one that would be more connected to having chickens in the house. But no, it's Venom. Venom's the one that's Sonny and Cher. They're in a relationship. They're friends. And Eddie doesn't like the chickens, doesn't want them around, and has much more compassion for the chickens. Eddie doesn't have compassion for the chickens where Venom does. It's just like interesting little tension between the two of them. Likewise, part of it gets interesting because there's all these ways in which Venom has a great amount of compassion for Eddie and wants the best for Eddie. So in regards to Anne getting engaged, Venom is the one that is articulating feelings about all of this a little bit more clearly than Eddie is able to. But then even in the pivotal moment where they go visit Cletus starts badgering Eddie, and Venom is the one that kind of loses his cool and goes off on Cletus over it and attacks him, because he's being defensive of his friend. And that's the thing, that choice on Venom's part to go after him, that's what ends up breaking them apart eventually, is because Eddie is so mad about what Venom did for him. And this is a Venom, earlier in the day had been like cooking him food and stuff because of learning that his ex-fiancée is getting married to someone else. So Venom's like trying really hard to like be kind to Eddie, while at the same time not fully understanding what he needs in the moment and what will make life much more difficult for Eddie, that eventually leads to their breakup. And, so I'll talk about Venom on his own in just a little bit, but, it plays out the way these stories do, which is the two of them go their separate ways, and Eddie does an investigation, gets himself arrested. He's not quite arrested, but he realizes, like, we're kind of responsible for trouble out there, and I don't have the ability to do what I need to do to undo this. And Venom lives free. He lives wild. He does a bunch of the stuff he's wanted to do, not in hiding, and at the same time realizes, like, no, the only person I want to experience all this with is Eddie. And that the classic realization that characters have in movies like this, TV shows like this, that you have all that freedom away from them, only to realize all that stuff, it's only satisfying if it's done with someone you actually care about. That thus brings them back together towards in the film. And then even as you get to the end of it, in the middle of the climax, we'll talk about it later on, but as they realize one of the reasons that they have the ability to defeat a more powerful alien is the simple fact that they're on the same page. They're not fighting against each other, really. They drive each other crazy, but in the moment, they can actually work together and compromise to do life and battle together. And so, as simplistic as it is, as much it is as a cliche of rom-coms, of roommate stories, they find a way to take a plot line that you don't at all associate with big CGI tentpole comic book movies, incorporate the two together in a way that if you dug the bromance, if that's like the weirdness of their relationship is what you dug about the first movie, this is an even more satisfying version of it because it really plays it out and explores it. And so I had a lot of fun with it. Even just the simple fact that it is so much this plot line that we've seen so many times before in all these other types of stories, and we get it here with them. That's just fun. Two people that learn through struggle, conflict, breaking up, and getting back together again. They realize the importance of compromise, change, growth, and how much they need each other. Then I wanted to talk about Venom on his own for just a little bit. So there's this sequence where Eddie and Venom break up, and so Venom heads out and through the city and just starts jumping from body to body, doing the stuff he's wanted to do, being free, and he has fun, but it also leaves him empty and it drains him. He realizes he's not a good fit for any of these other people. So part of this is, the first one is that you just see Venom jumping across the city from body to body. And I've been doing a bunch of research on canceled Venom movies for a video I'm doing tomorrow on canceled Venom movies. And the guys that did Deadpool, wrote both Deadpool movies, they worked on a Venom back about 12, 13 years ago, after Spider-Man 3, right around when Zombieland came out, like after they were out Zombieland, before Zombieland was released, they worked on Venom. And they've done some interviews where they talked about this, and one of the big things they talked about that they were excited about in that movie was the idea of the symbiote jumping from person to person through the streets of a city, doing all these different things. And I read that over the last week in preparation for that video, and then I went to go see this movie, and you kind of see a version of that. I don't know what their version would have been, but you see a version of it in here of Venom trying to connect with different people, doing wild different things, and it failing. And of course, the big standout sequence in there is him going to this rave filled with weirdos. And so because of the crazy lighting, because of the crazy costumes, people don't realize this is not a guy. Or they think it's a guy. Don't realize it's an alien thing. That's actually who it is. And so it finds the context where he can come out and be himself. And I think through that, there are all these headlines like Venom has a coming out scene in the movie, which he does. And he says coming out of Eddie's closet, which like is a reference to coming out, but like headlines ran with that in a way that was like misrepresented as something that it's definitely not in the movie. It's just a fun, goofy sequence where Venom gets to be free and finally reveal who he is to a group of people and not feel like he has to hide. And so it's kind of a interesting, fun little sequence where Venom gets to be himself and they find a context. He's not walking down the middle of the street doing that. He does it in the middle, in this context of this rave party deal. And so I thought when I saw the trailers, like, oh dear, what is this scene with Venom with the glow sticks on him? That could go really bad. And then in the movie, in the context, the way it played out, I was like, okay, yeah, that kind of convinced me that would kind of work. Now, one of the things I've been talking about is how the movie was edited so tight, and it doesn't flesh some ideas out and explain exactly what's going on there. And so there's kind of like some unanswered questions that seem like they needed an answer, and whether there were deleted scenes or problems with the script, I don't know. One of them does come up when you watch the second time and you really pay attention to the fact of like, okay, Venom just jumped through a bunch of bodies that all collapse on the ground and look really, really, really sick and are in bad shape. Like, did he kill all those people like some of the stuff that happened in the first movie, or Like, what's going on here? How does what we saw here tie into the lab experiments in the first movie? And are these people going to be okay? And raises just a few questions that I think it needed a little bit of answer. And I wonder a little bit how, because I think there was a deleted subplot about more so into the investigation into Eddie. At the beginning, Eddie says, hey, they're investigating with that stuff that happened, and they're going to take us to Area 51 and kill us. And then when Eddie's arrested, the police officer puts these images in front of him and is like, there's so much trouble surrounding you. So he's aware of stuff. And then, of course, he breaks out, so people are chasing him. But feels like that's a deeper plot there. And I wonder if a piece of that is surrounding the area where Eddie was, there's these bodies showing up. These bodies sick from Venom, and this creature was seen at this rave, and then Carnage is on the run, and maybe people were putting that together. I'm just making this stuff up. I don't know if this is real. I don't know if that's the deleted subplot that all ties together in some 2-hour and 10-minute version of this film, but it seemed like there could be something more to that probably needed to either be elaborated on or was elaborated on and ended up on the cutting room floor. Then let's start talking about our villains here with Shriek. So the movie starts off kind of showing her and Cletus at this place for troubled kids where clearly they immediately have a relationship between the two of them. They have a special bond. And of course they show young version of Woody Harrelson's character Cletus in there, and he doesn't look at all like what Woody Harrelson looked like in the mid-90s, because in the mid-90s, Woody Harrelson was significantly older than that person was. It seems like they don't realize how old Woody Harrelson actually is, and not close to the age of the girl that he's playing against. And anyway, that's a side note. But kind of establishing their relationship and how she's being taken away, and then they kind of drag her off, and they're going to lock her up in this other place. And at first, I thought they were setting her up as a more sympathetic character. Both of them as kind of more sympathetic characters that are just being mistreated, and therefore you feel bad for them, and perhaps some of what they're doing is escaping their abuse. And there's hints of that, kind of where in the finale, where Cletus talks about, Eddie, you didn't write the other half of the story about how these family members I killed were abusing me. And so there's details of that, and certainly she was mistreated and kind of plays into it. But the character's really not presented as sympathetic as you go into it. You know, she tries to escape immediately by blowing out the guy's eardrum and attempting to kill a guy that he wasn't responsible for the decision and everything that happened to her. Then as soon as she escapes, she seems very comfortable with everything Carnage is doing with brutally murdering a lot of people. Now, if you've been locked up for 25 years, 26 years, in a cage with almost nothing, I'm sure you do have a pretty dark perspective on authority figures, and so there's an understandable side to it, but she seems very much going along with the fact of just utter carnage that he's doing there. And you know, they don't dive too much into Shriek in her backstory, or her as an individual character. She's used much more as the love interest to Cletus, to kind of give him this person that he's fixated on, that he actually cares about, that he wants everything for it. So she plays into that, and beyond that, she's the person that is crazy, willing to kill people. And we get in the finale, she doesn't like being told what to do. So when Carnage tells her to be not so loud, she didn't seem like she appreciated that very much, and she certainly wasn't listening all that much when they're saying don't use your shrieking. So character that I think fit the role she had in the film well, especially a movie this short, but very much a side character, not intended to be not all that fleshed out. Even as you get to the end of the movie, it was like a little bit vague as to what happened to her. Like my impression is she got crushed at the end by the bell that fell on her, and she tried to shriek to stop it from falling on her, but it wasn't enough, and so maybe she was crushed. And then, but I think I might have missed something in there. I read some other places that she was arrested, but I didn't think that I saw that happen either time that I saw it. But I thought she worked for the movie well. But right along with her, you got to talk about Cletus Kasady, the villain at the center of our story. And I appreciated how much time he got. That right out of the gate, he's introduced in the movie before Eddie shows back up. And you see him as a young person that's clearly disturbed and messed up and fixated on this one person. And his worldview is very simple, but his life experience seems to have been very simple. That he was abused as a child, so he started killing family members, got locked up in this place where he's clearly a psycho and has killed many people all along the way and continues to be a psycho that kills people whose brain is not quite all there. But people that he feels that he understands or that understands him, he becomes fixated with, including this girl that helped him when he was growing up. And for whatever reason, he becomes obsessed with Eddie Brock. And Woody Harrelson is just really good at playing these types of characters because on the page, you have a guy that killed family members, kills people flippantly, is a sociopath, doesn't care who he's killed. He's difficult. He speaks in gibberish and nonsense. So he's not a person that's immediately easy to connect with and care about. But when you have someone like Woody Harrelson that is, great at playing weirdos, psychotic weirdos, and giving them a charisma while being totally detached from humanity, that's one of his strong points. And so I thought he just did a great job. And it's one of those ones where, I don't know who could do quite what he did in this movie and fit this franchise the way that he did. I just thought he did a great job in it. But so you immediately have this guy that's obsessed with Eddie, and Eddie doesn't seem to understand why or what he's doing. And I think even the audience gets what he's doing more because he seems like distinctly interested in Eddie and wants to spend time with him. And so as you get to the end of it, and Cletus says, "I just wanted to be your friend." And as an audience member, I think we got that, but I don't think Eddie got that at all because Eddie certainly has a self-centered side to where he's oblivious to the people around him and doesn't understand what they need. And especially watching it the second time, you see that in the movie, that he doesn't see what Venom needs at the beginning, and he doesn't see he's not working with Venom to give him what he needs to go along. When he meets with Anne, who reveals, "Hey, I'm engaged," she has to tell him how to behave so he can respond in a way that works for her. And then even with Cletus, he doesn't know how to relate to her. Even the Mulligan, the detective guy in it, who isn't particularly likable or easy to work with, he doesn't work with him. He drives that guy crazy too and makes him into someone that's not really an ally, even though in essence they should be on the same side. And so you kind of give Eddie this character flaw that ties into each of the relationships he has in the movie and what he has to learn by the time you get to the end of him. And in my spoiler-free review, I said that's where the movie felt thematically consistent. It's not a great character study. It's not intended to explore the human condition and the ties that bind us together. It's not that. But it's a movie that has this idea at the center of it, like broken relationships, broken people in relationship with one another, and let's keep playing that out. And when you're trying to have a movie that's focused and consistent, you want to have like a theme that runs through it and explore that through the different dynamics, but all kind of in the same ballpark. And so you give Eddie a character flaw that you keep seeing playing out. And why do these conflicts keep happening with all these people around him? Some of it being center of the movie. Why does Cletus get angry with him and cause this scenario because of the way that he even treated him and related to him? That flaw that he has leads to the tension, the conflict of the film. And that's what he has to learn throughout the movie. It's kind of screenwriting 101, but that's not always a bad thing, that you have clear ideas that you're going with and have your character play them out. Anyway, back to Cletus. And so then he breaks out, gets Carnage. We'll talk about Carnage in a little bit. He gets under Eddie's skin because he's mad at Eddie because Eddie, instead of working with him, discovered his bodies and gets him on actual death row. It's actually going to happen. And so that round, if you're Cletus Kasady, you're upset about the fact that you're probably going to die because of Eddie, and you wanted him to be your friend, not the guy that gets you killed. So he breaks out and immediately goes to the one person he cares about, this girl. And, but there's probably some elements to the fact that we don't if they've both been locked up forever, how have they known how to communicate? And he's talking about like newspapers, and he's saying things to communicate. And clearly they have a certain amount of back and forth, and he has some awareness. Like, seems like he knows she's out there, but maybe that seems underdeveloped as to why that is and how he seems to know as much as he does to even care or look for her, all that fun stuff. But whatever. So it turns into this Bonnie and Clyde type situation of him trying to find her and wanting to get her gifts to just get to a wedding. And this is set up in the beginning scene of the movie. The first thing he does is make her a little ring. Pass it over to her that she wears. Almost as if an engagement ring. And we'd been talking about getting to this chapel. And that's the finale of the film. Once again, focused. Once again, clear objective. That's one of the things I appreciate about the movie. Very early on, you realize, okay, he's obsessed with her. He wants to get back to her. And even in the poetry that Cletus says to Eddie, we can interpret it better than Eddie can. So we go, oh, how's that going to tie in? Is that where this is all headed? Oh, I've seen the trailer, and they're like at a chapel. Oh, I have an idea where this movie is headed. And that's a good thing. When you're watching a film and you don't want to know the specifics. You don't want it too foreshadowed, but you want to have an idea, the ballpark of where we're going. If it's not, if it's a mystery, you don't. But like, you want to be able to follow along for the ride properly. And that's what this movie did. It knows it's not about big, gigantic twists and turns. It's about the thrill ride. It's about the relationships. And so it's focused. It knows what it's trying to do. It's, again, not astounding cinema, but effective and efficient at the thing it's trying to do. And so he breaks her out, and you start to see that he likes her more than Carnage likes her, which is interesting. Once again, I'll get to Carnage in a bit. And they have their wedding, and he's trying to protect her even in the finale when Carnage is putting her in danger, and Carnage is being mean to her, which creates that vulnerability that Eddie and Venom can use to win the fight at the end. But in general, I thought Cletus himself was a nice addition. Carnage, I thought, was underdeveloped, but we'll get to that in a bit. Real quick, let's talk about Detective Mulligan. He's established in the intro of the film as this guard that's taking Shriek to the place that she stays for 25 years, or however long it was. Loses his hearing, and so you start to understand like why he's very interested in that girl's boyfriend 25 years later, why he very much is paying attention to it, how he ties into this whole story. And the character's not particularly likable. He doesn't have a ton of depth to him, but I think he fits this role in the film. It's a simple role that just this investigator, this outside part from either our heroes, our villains, and then you have him over here as this other thing that kind of ties them together just a little bit, is a foil for all of them that can move the plot along and work with Eddie at certain moments, but also heavily works against him. He provides a lot of conflict, but he can also move the plot forward when it needs to. And in the second half of the film, where he gets into conflict again with Eddie, he arrests him. Or he doesn't arrest him, he brings him into custody for questioning. And then when Eddie escapes, then kind of puts this, puts a search out for him because, he escaped. So I think that's once again where I think things are underdeveloped, because I'm not sure Eddie would have been arrested. So they're searching for him, but why are they searching for him? He broke you've got the whole police force searching for Eddie Brock, who is not being charged with a crime because he blew a hole in the wall. Granted, blowing the hole in the wall, pretty big deal. But it's, in terms of Cletus being on the run, you don't put a bunch of helicopters and manpower trying to track down Eddie for poking a hole in the wall and leaving in an inappropriate manner if he wasn't formally under arrest for a crime. And the movie, they bring him in for questioning because he's tied to a bunch of suspicious things, but you can't hold, seems like there's some big gaps there, and seems like a subplot was entirely removed. So they break out, and Eddie and Venom have their scene where they make up with each other. It's a lot of fun to see that. And then it cuts to a scene of Eddie and Venom in this tower looking over the city, and you see helicopters flying all around, and Venom's like, they're looking for him. And then Eddie goes, well, they're looking for us too. Which, like, clearly Eddie perceives of, we're on the run. Everyone is looking for us now. Which would be true, but it wouldn't be helicopters if you're just the guy that escaped. And so it seems like there's something that is explained more, or more people saw Venom. Like, is that what happened? That they saw footage of Venom on Eddie breaking through the wall and getting out of there? Is that what happened? And once again, deleted scenes. Things that kind of answer those questions and explain exactly why would Eddie perceive of helicopters are looking for me in that context where serial killer's on the run that's a monster. That would be all the helicopters. They wouldn't be looking for Eddie with helicopters. That's the key distinction there. And then likewise, you get to the end of the movie, and there's all these police forces showing up, and they're like, we gotta run. They're after us too. Like, because everybody, why would that be the case? Anne can say, I was kidnapped by that thing to draw Eddie over here. And then her boyfriend can confirm, yeah, she was kidnapped. I was there. I got bonked over the head, and they said, do this to get Eddie Brock to show up. There's a series of lies you could say if there wasn't a very clear thing that the police saw that went. And this, I guess, is what I've been meaning to say. I'm trying to freeball this whole deal. I'm not looking at my notes as much as I probably should, but I think what happened was there's something in the movie about clearly the FBI, the X-Files, are on the lookout for Venom. They don't know who he is. They don't know what he is. But the X-Files are out looking for Venom. And Eddie knows that. And that's probably established much earlier in the film. And then when Carnage shows up, X-Files are really trying to figure out, and Eddie's at the center of it. And so then X-Files is looking at him. And I'm using X-Files. I don't know if there's actual characters. I don't know exactly what this looks like. But potentially there were characters that were specifically looking for Venom and suspected Eddie was involved. And then it's very clear Eddie's involved and perhaps does get arrested for something that he's specifically tied to. And then bodies are showing up sick or dead because of Venom running loose on the city. Eddie is arrested. Venom shows up in the room, blows a hole in the wall, runs off with Eddie, and the police all saw this creature they've been looking for. Like, that's it. Clearly, Eddie Brock is tied to this creature that was eating heads that we've been looking for. Wherever Eddie Brock is, we find this other thing. Now it would make a lot more sense of why at the end of the movie, this whole squad is chasing for them. At the end of the movie, Eddie and Venom are about to break up, and Eddie's like, no, man, I'm going with you. Like, I'm leaving with you. And so I think there's a bunch of deleted stuff about the Area 51, about the FBI investigation that explains why Eddie so much is on the run just for breaking out of a room when what was the crime that he was. I've seen it twice. Maybe I'm just like missing something really obvious, but like, what is the exact crime that he was being held for? That he couldn't just walk out, that they're like, it seems like just like a big gap there. Like, yeah, things seem suspicious about you. Okay, well, I'm going to leave. What it was that they couldn't just tell a lie at the end. So something seemed like it was missing, and they also want to put him on the run at the end. So anyway, I'm mumbling a little bit. We get to the end of the movie because Mulligan himself got bonked over the head, taken to the big finale, which I'll talk about in just a second. And at the end of the film, like, Shriek's trying to kill him, tries to choke him, and then we see the shot of him with his eyes blue. His eyes blue on it. Something has happened to him that he's got some powers added to him, and I'm not quite sure what that implied. I didn't have seen twice, try to pay attention. Like, his eyes changed colors. It didn't seem symbiote. It didn't seem alien. It seemed maybe it was clearly supernatural superpowers was going on there. Monsters are appearing. So I don't know exactly what that meant, but seems we'll see him again with powers. Or in light of the post-credit scene, I don't know what that means. Maybe we won't. Then let's talk about Carnage himself and his characterization. Now, I felt he was severely underdeveloped. And the way I articulated that in my spoiler-free review was to refer to the fact that it didn't seem like we got to know him as a separate character. That they had interactions between Cletus and him, and they had some disagreements, and it says some dialogue about Venom's my dad, gotta kill dad, gotta kill my father, but it doesn't stop to elaborate on any of that. And I got a couple comments in my comment section being like, well, dude, clearly you haven't read the comics, because the reason that that's the case is because Cletus is connected with his actual blood. It's a blood connection. He's not like Venom. They're not two personalities. They're intertwined as one, much more so. Okay, fair enough. In the comics, that's what it is. But I don't think the people that said that to me had seen the movie. Because if you watch the movie, they're portrayed not the same as Eddie and Venom in regards to exactly how they interact, but Carnage talks to Cletus. Carnage separates at times, especially in the finale. They disagree, especially as to the new wife. And they have dialogue back and forth the same way that Eddie and Venom do. But there's just these little moments of it. There's not enough of it that you get a vibe for exactly how it works. And likewise, the key thing that people in the comments said, the comic readers in the comment section said was like, if you know the comics, you know that he's in the blood, so it's different. He's not a symbiote like Venom. In the movie, it states, or the Shriek says, oh, he has one in you, just like you. One of those things in him, just like you, just like being the key phrase. And then other people throughout it, Anne says to the convenience store lady, there's one of those things in Cletus, just like you, a symbiote in him. And Venom says, yeah. There's not a scene in the movie that says that they're different. There's not a scene in the movie that elaborates on what does it mean that Carnage is a child of Venom. It's like, gotta kill the guy that I came from. Gotta kill dad. What does that mean? There's not any scenes. Going back to what Andy Serkis said. Andy Serkis said, I don't want the movie, or I don't want to get my language on this, not hanging around for too much exposition. That's what he wanted. He wanted a thrill ride, not hanging around for too much exposition. Some things need some exposition. What exactly is the deal with Carnage? How is he different from Venom? Because you spent the whole first movie establishing the rules of how they connect with other people and how it failed most of the time. But there's something about Eddie and Venom that they're a good match. And so we all these things about Venom is eating off Eddie's organs, and it doesn't work with other people, but it works with Eddie, and he can heal him. And this movie doesn't elaborate on what that is. It doesn't elaborate on what the dynamic is with Cletus, how it's like the comics, how it's different from the comics, how it's different from Venom. Like, it just doesn't go into it. And so all we know about Carnage as a character in and of himself is he's from Venom. He doesn't like his dad and wants him dead. He has to kill his dad, though he doesn't say why. And he doesn't get along with his host's bride because she shrieks and he doesn't like that. What else do we know? Like, he likes to eat people. Okay, but how much that's what these symbiotes like to do, and that's Cletus doesn't mind killing people, so he's along for it. But we just don't know much else about him. There's no depth of how he works, how he connects, his personality, none of it. I don't know any of it. And that was the disappointment, because you get a lot of him doing stuff. The breakout sequence, and then the two breakout sequences. He breaks out, then he breaks out his girlfriend, and there's a big gigantic battle. There's little moments all along the way where he's showing up places and killing people, and then we get the big finale. So there's 3 big action sequences with Carnage, plus little moments here and there. That's quite a bit. But the personality, the rules, the mythology, how it all works, that's what we didn't get. That's what I thought was missing. And you can't do that. You can't be like, wait, if you read the comics, you know. Your job is to explain all of that. I get you want a thrill ride. You don't want to bore us with exposition. Some exposition we need. And part of that is your job with the screenwriter is to come up with ways to tell us what we need to know in an entertaining way. That's when you have a great script, where you can convey lots of big, complex information in a way that doesn't bore me. And they just left it out. They didn't explain it. Maybe it's like the comics, like the comment section is saying. Maybe it's something else. They didn't say. Maybe we'll get a director's cut or an extended cut with 20 more minutes, 30 more minutes, and 5 whole minutes dedicated to us learning about how Carnage works. Or maybe we don't. Then real quick, I wanted to talk about Anne and Dan. They're more important to they're not major parts of the story, but they are used to progress the plot along just a little bit. That's the big other person that's the person that Eddie cares about. Therefore, Venom cares about this person. And therefore, you want to have them back. But there's not really a good plot reason this time around as to why they would be particularly involved. And so then you just have the plot point that they're getting married. Therefore, they get an appearance early in the film. And then they don't come back until we get to the second half of the film, where Eddie needs someone that knows about Venom to help him get Venom back. Plot-wise, that makes sense that you'd bring her in. And it's kind of fun to have her be this middle person that there's like 2 people that Eddie really needs to apologize to. And Venom is one and she's the other one. So you get that fun little moment there. And all along the way, they use Dan nicely for some little humor bits. And I appreciated that they just have this little line of dialogue of like, hey, if you just want to know, fire and sound is how you hurt these things, just so you know if something happens, that like we're going to war, if we're in danger, if she gets kidnapped, you need to know this. I wonder if that was a reshoot of this, like, oh, why does Dan know to pour gasoline on his head, or if they just put that in there right along to make sure that he has the information he needs to do what he does in the finale. But when you're watching the finale, which we'll get to in just a second, that he gets involved and does something, I just thought was a nice touch. And thus, in him doing so, wins over Venom, to Venom, who said he didn't like him earlier on, says he did, in fact, like him at the end of the film, which is oddly satisfying to have Venom come around on Dan and actually like him. But so it's not I had a couple comments on my spoiler free, like, hey, you didn't talk about the girlfriend or ex-girlfriend. I was like, right. She's added a couple times in ways that make sense, but there's not a ton to talk about if you're not going into spoilers and can't talk about some specifics on there. And our next to last subject, the big climax of the film. And I thought this was a much better finale to the movie than in the first film. You're watching the first film and you're 15 minutes before the end credits start rolling, and Riot finally gets in our villain, Drake, and immediately says, we got to get on a rocket to go get the other symbiotes to bring them back. And you're like, oh, and he's like, okay, let's go do that. And so then they're rushing to a rocket, and Venom has to rush to stop him. And it's like, wait, where did this come from? Why are we heading towards the rocket? What just happened? And it didn't have much meaning to it, significance. And then it was a Venom who's black, Riot who's dark gray, on a dark bridge at nighttime. A lot of the fight is them like blobbing together, and then they kill Eddie and you're like, that's not going to stay. And then they kill Venom and you're like, that's not going to stay. So none of it felt like it had much weight or stakes. It was short. It wasn't all that thrilling because it was black on dark visuals with blobs. So it was like, okay, this one, you pull together all these characters that have relationships, that you understand their dynamics. You understand why the villains are after these 3 characters. It goes all the way back to the beginning of the film. Everything that's out along the way, it's why they're vindictive towards these individual people. You have Eddie trying to save his ex-fiancée, Dan trying to save his current fiancée. Like, there's stakes that you care about. There's people that are vulnerable that could be hurt in this situation that you don't want to see. There's even a little segment that echoes the end of Amazing Spider-Man 2 or the comic bit where Gwen Stacy dies, and they do shots that, like, you're like, I know Sony is willing to kill off characters like this. Like, are they going to kill her off? Could that happen in this moment? Could like you actually believe that because they were willing to do it 7 years ago with Amazing Spider-Man 2. Maybe it was going to happen here. They didn't. But things like that make you care about what's happening. It's a longer sequence. It's in a context where it's lit better. You can tell the difference between the two of them much better because one is red and one is black. And it has had a lot more back and forth tension to it where there's little things happening to where Venom, the underdog, can get an advantage. He has allies showing up. Carnage is more powerful, but not as connected to his partners as properly. And it's where Eddie and Venom agree about who they want to save and the rules they're playing by. Carnage is not in agreement with Cletus on what's going on. And so there's those little things in there that give Venom that advantage to be able to take it, to be able to win. And once again, that's where you have kind of satisfying writing of the heroes acknowledge the disadvantage that the more powerful person has, and they use their advantage against that person's vulnerability. And how do we win in the end? Because Eddie has allies in the finale, and he's working together with Venom, whereas Cletus and Carnage do not. Even though they have Shriek there, there is such disagreement about her that she's almost an additional vulnerability rather than an asset. And so little things like that just make for a finale that's enjoyable, and then you get to the end, and I think there's just enough right payoff and everything to make it satisfying. Of you get the final conversation between Eddie and Cletus that has that human touch, and then you get the payoff joke of Venom eating both of them mercilessly, and you get the payoff of the final moments with Dan and Venom being like, "Hey, I dig you," and you get Dan to just get in on the action, and I prefer it when the other guy's not a jerk. The other guy's actually a good guy that's stable, has a good job, and is decent. He's not mean to Eddie, and he consistently is doing things that are helpful while being like, I don't be your ex-fiance that's unstable and kind of a jerk and involves aliens, but he wants to do the right thing, and he does, and he's willing to put himself in harm's way to save her. He's the other guy, but he's a good guy. And so I dug all that stuff, and just pulling it all together because you cared about the characters, you care about what's happening to them, and therefore at the end, it's satisfying because it has meaning. The movie's focused, established themes about broken relationships, and Eddie and Venom are able to work theirs out together. Cletus and Carnage can't. They're on just two different pages, and that's the thematically broken relationships, learning to work together. Eddie and Venom are able to do that. Therefore, they're able to be victorious in the end. And you even get this sequence, this little shot at that, whatever that place is in San Francisco that, I don't know what it's called, but it's like looks like these ancient ruins. And Eddie is talking about this statue that symbolizes two people with wildly different worldviews that disagree on a lot of stuff. But their disagreements are what give them better and fuller perspective. And so they were each better because they knew each other and learned to work together, which is what the whole movie was about. Eddie and Venom learned to do it, and therefore they were victorious. Simple, straightforward, it's focused. And even as it gets to the very end of the movie, the two of them head off together, and their weird bromance, they get to spend time on the beach. He listened to Venom, and he let him put his toes in the sand. He finally listened and gave him what he wanted. Eddie learned his lesson, and that's what needed to happen for him to be victorious, for the two of them to be together in this weird, symbiotic, in this sense, very literally, relationship. And the movie ends. And then we get the mid-credits scene, which was quite the doozy that my audience, when I saw it with the press screening, there wasn't a ton of people in the room because the press screenings they're different with every company, and with this company, they're very spread out. We were in two different theaters, no general audience. So there's not a lot of people in the theater, and still some people were hooting and hollering. When I saw it with a big crowd 2 hours ago, movie ended, and you could it showed that stuff. People started like, yeah. You could hear like the cheers just a little bit. And then as soon as the scene ended, like people just started clapping like, yeah. Just so pumped because we have this scene that confirms that this Venom is going to be with Tom Holland. We kind of knew it was coming. It wasn't that terribly surprising. We saw Vulture in the Morbius trailer over a year ago. So we've known this is what they wanted to do. And they call the universe that has Venom in it the Spider-Man universe. We knew this is what's coming. We knew they were heading towards this. But seeing it confirmed, man, it just puts a big grin on your face. And even the way it played out, that Venom's like, I gotta tell you, Eddie, there's so much knowledge I can share with you about all this stuff from the symbiote knowledge. Let me tell you about it. And then some weird thing happens where the universe is shuffling. And suddenly they're in a different hotel room. And the broadcast is playing from the very end of Far From Home. What does all that mean? What's all this knowledge? And then Venom sees Peter Parker on the screen. He goes, that guy, licks the screen. Venom knows Peter Parker. He knows who that guy is. And so what does that mean? What's all this knowledge? What was that event that happened? And what does Venom know? Where does he know Peter Parker from? And that's just such a fun way to be like earth-shattering or multiverse-shattering mid-credit scene that has so many questions, so many things to explore as the implications of it. Like, is that moment, that break in time because of the spell that Doctor Strange casts? Is that what we're seeing? That exact moment of the perspective of someone in one of the other universes being shuffled into the main MCU timeline. Is that what just happened? We saw the implications of that spell. That's cool. That is real. That's a fun way to do that. That is a fun way to tease future thing if that's going to happen. And does that mean that Tom Hardy is in No Way Home? And they've done a really great job of hiding that. Not putting him in the trailers. Not a thing like that. Like, is that like a big, gigantic thing? Everyone's mind is on, oh, we're going to get Andrew Garfield, we're going to get Tobey Maguire. But in reality, are they going to drop trailer 2 right before Eternals? And in trailer 2, you've got Tom Hardy swinging along with Tom Holland fighting each other? So much potential, so many exciting things that could come from this. It's an exciting time if you're into nerdy stuff. And so many things to theorize about what it all could mean. Where could it all be headed? And that was a fun one. That's actually why I went to go see. I was like locked in. I'm going to go see it opening night no matter what. I just want to be in a room full of people that are going to be pumped for that scene. I have to experience that with them. And then the credits start rolling, and you see like half the theater walk out, and you're like, "We're seeing 2021. How do you not know that these movies have mid-credit and post-credit scenes? What are you doing, people?" So that's what was going on in my head, and I almost said it, but I'm too shy, and so I didn't actually do that. There you have it. That's my take on Venom, Let There Be Carnage, all the spoilers, all the fun stuff that I could think about. I'm sure there's even more things I could talk about, but I wanted this video to be 20 minutes. I think it's over an hour long now. Come back tomorrow. I'm going to be talking about the canceled Venom movies. If you want to hear my thoughts on the canceled Spider-Man movies or the story behind them, that's over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.